We are live. Jackie Andrade, Professor of Psychology. Welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, good. Thanks so much for joining me. And we're going to get into how to 5x the weight loss, which are the results of one of your studies earlier. But I couldn't help when I was reading your bio that you spoke about awareness during anesthesia. Obviously, the first thing that comes to my mind is people wake up during anesthesia. I thought that was like an urban legend or, a bad movie. Before we go into weight loss, can we talk about that just for a second?
Okay, so for me, this is a kind of related topic because I'm really interested in how we can use psychology to tackle real world problems. I got interested in awareness during anaesthesia because a professor of anaesthesia asked me for ways of measuring how conscious sedated volunteers were, so they could test new ways of assessing awareness during anaesthesia. So that's how I got into it. But it's a really interesting problem because it's very rare, but it does happen sometimes. Many people have anaesthetics every year, certainly in westernized countries. And it can be that stuff of kind of the nightmare scenario of feeling pain and, feeling like you're trapped. One of the things we found was that it could be a lot less than that. It could be just hearing some voices or noticing sensations. But where the psychology comes in is how you interpret that is really important. So if you think that the fact you can hear voices means that you've died already, or that the team are battling to save your life, you're much more likely to be traumatized by the experience than if you realize that it's the start of the operation and you're not quite under yet. So there's also interesting psychology there. It relates to the weight loss because by training, I work on memory and an aspect of memory, which is mental imagery, how we picture and sort of re-experience events in our minds that happened in the past or things that we anticipate happening in the future.
Right. And so how does that relate directly to weight loss?
So the weight loss research came out of some work that I was doing with colleagues in Plymouth and a colleague, longtime collaborator in Australia, on craving and addiction. So in some ways, that's the opposite of successful weight loss. What we were interested in was kind of mapping the mental processes that are happening when you're craving something. So the theory that we developed gave a central role to mental imagery. And we know that mental imagery is really dependent on a type of memory that we call working memories. So that's your ability to keep information sort of at the forefront of your mind. So, if I was to tell you my phone number, you would use working memory to keep it in your head while you found a pen to write it down.
Okay.
If you were driving and you had to remember which way to turn at a junction, you might keep the picture of that in your mind until you've actually navigated the junction. So that's working memory. We use it heavily when we're imagining things, and it has limited capacity. So if you try and imagine, say, what your car looks like and what your best friend looks like at the same time, unless you can come up with an image that has your best friend in your car, it's very hard to do both justice simultaneously because our minds are designed so we can only truly focus on one thing at a time. So that's where memory and mental imagery come in. And what our theory said was that when you're craving a drug or a food, say you're craving some chocolate, what you're actually doing is imagining what it would be like to eat that chocolate, maybe picturing your favorite brands, how it melts in your mouth, what the first bite will taste like, even how your body or your emotions will feel when you've had it. Maybe you'll be better able to focus on the job that you're doing now that you've had some chocolate and got that craving out of the way. And one of the things we were trying to explain is why, when people are trying to quit a substance, do you devote all this mental effort to craving when it's counterproductive? As humans, we're constantly shooting ourselves in the foot mentally.
Don't think about a pink elephant,
Exactly. So telling yourself that weight loss will be simple because I just won't think about chocolate isn't well, you think about it all the time. But the explanation in our theory is when you're imagining something, it's much more emotional than if you're just talking about it or thinking about it in some more abstract sense. So, you can really imagine the pleasure of having that chocolate in a way that maybe talking about your favorite brand might not sort of stimulate that emotion. So that's the reason if you're feeling a bit down, you do that imagery and it brings some of the pleasure of actually eating chocolate, and that makes you feel a bit better. But the more you do it, the more you're aware of that discrepancy between the chocolate that you really want and your current chocolate-free state. And in normal times, that motivates you to go and get some chocolate. But obviously that's a problem if you're trying to avoid it because you want to lose weight or you want to stay focused on the task that you're doing at the moment. So that was our theory. It's called elaborated intrusion theory because people start doing this imagery when they get what feels like a spontaneous thought about chocolate. And that's when we ask people about their cravings and how they started. They most of the time say, I don't know, I just, I thought about having a cup of coffee, or I thought about some chocolate or a cigarette. And once that thought was in my head, I couldn't overcome it. I couldn't ignore it. So we did a lot of experimental work and sort of psychometrics work on cravings. So what that means is we developed different questionnaires that would measure sort of the contents of people's craving and test our theory that imagery was one of the important parts. And we would see if people who reported more craving and more imagery had more problems with addiction or were more likely to consume a substance. And those studies broadly supported our theory. And then we came to the question of, what are we going to do with this? Could we actually turn it around and create cravings for functional behaviours? So that, most people, if you ask them about their lives, they don't say, what I really want to do with my life is eat lots of chocolate. They say, I want to feel more energetic or more confident or slimmer or a better parent or something. So
more money, more friends,
how can we create really strong desires for those activities? Because the problem is often, a lot of research looks at motivation sort of on its own, so how motivated am I to lose weight, or how motivated am I to eat healthily? But these things don't happen on their own. My chocolate cravings generally come when I'm, trying to finish a piece of writing or prepare a lecture or something. At that moment, it seems more important to get rid of them by eating some chocolate than it does because I want to finish this piece of work. And so we're all kind of trapped in this situation where different bits of our lives, and especially food, are so intimately bound up with each other that we never just have kind of one decision to make. There's always some conflict. So, am I going to eat the chocolate, or am I going to finish my work or stick to my diet, or or am I going to fit in with my friends who are all eating chocolate, because that social life's important to me. So, if you've got a calorie counting app, or you're told, here's what you should eat and how much you should exercise to lose a certain amount of weight, it makes it seem easy, but it really isn't easy. We can't just quit food like, somebody could quit smoking. We've got to have it. So you really have to change a lot of aspects of your life to lose weight successfully. And that requires a lot of motivation. And so according to our sort of theoretical work, the problem is at that moment when you're offered another piece of chocolate cake, it's very easy to imagine how delicious that's going to taste, because it's right there in front of you. You've eaten it before. You're close enough to smell it. Your friends there kind of egging you on. That idea of, losing 5 kilos or whatever is quite an abstract, distant, intangible sort of thing. It's really hard for it to compete mentally with that delicious sort of pleasurable image of the chocolate cake. So that's the problem that we were trying to tackle.
Right. And so, but then, so I don't know how many studies you ran, but then you developed functional imagery training, and you use that in conjunction with motivational interviewing. Is that right? So
motivational interviewing is kind of part of functional imagery training. So motivational interviewing is a way of collaborating with a person, a client, to, rather than to give them advice about what they should do, instead to find out what they want to do, what ideas they have for going about it, and to sort of reflect back to them some of the things that they've said, to try and really draw out what matters to them, because a lot of us bound up in the sort of day-to-day hassles, difficulties, tensions of our lives, and sometimes it takes another person to say, yeah, but what I'm hearing is you're the sort of person who really cares about X, and these other things getting in your way, but where you really want to be is over here. So motivational interviewing is called a person-centered approach, in the sense that it works with the person's ideas and expertise about their own life and their own bodies. And if you look at things from that perspective, then you compare it with the sort of standard weight loss strategies, which usually involve education about nutrition and kind of guidance on what would be a healthy lifestyle and so on. If you look at that approach in terms of motivation, I would argue it's really demotivating to be told you're in this situation because you were ignorant. And now I've given you the knowledge, you're fixed. Very medical approach, you've got a problem with your weight, so I'll give you kind of a mental pill.
Totally.
Treat that problem.
Totally.
So
sorry. I was needed a cough there, but appropriately timed. It's 100% right. And most people do know what a healthy meal looks like. I mean, there are obviously many debates about what a healthy meal is, but in general, we know that chocolate bars, French fries, hamburgers, like, these are not healthy foods, right?
Exactly. And I think the other thing is that all foods can be healthy sometimes. So, if you've just run a marathon and you urgently need to kind of replace calories, those foods are great. They're the perfect foods for it. But if you've got quite a sedentary lifestyle, they're maybe not the best things to eat. So, we did some work with people in focus groups to say, how do you find weight loss? What sort of smartphone apps do you find helpful? What are the biggest problems? And what they told us was that it was staying motivated. And although a lot of people said, I don't know a lot about nutrition, they also said in one participant's words, I do know you shouldn't eat the whole chocolate cake. So as you say, people know roughly what they should be doing. It's having that motivation to stick with it, because on the face of it, weight loss is quite boring. Most of the instructions are you cut out the things you enjoy from your diet, and it's short-term pain to get where you want to be.
And for many, it's a long-term pain. Well, they see it as that. Like, I will be tortured until I die unless I decide to just be overweight again. They're the only two ways they see it.
Exactly. And the problem is making it this sort of balance between, what I ought to do to get to, where I need to be. So motivational interviewing is a good starting point, because it's sort of finding out what's in it for the person. Why do they want to lose weight? We can't just make it about, I want to see 10 kilos less on the scales, because if you see 9 kilos less on the scales, you failed. And then you get in this yo-yo dieting situation. So it's about finding out what the person wants and how they want to approach it. Because there's no point me saying, go swimming, that's really good exercise, if you just dread the thought of appearing in public in a swimming costume. So you've got to work with what the person would find enjoyable and sustainable. What functional imagery training adds to that is two things. So one, it takes our research on craving and imagery, and the fact that imagery is so much more emotional than just talking, and it adds imagery throughout this conversation. So, if I find out that, let's say, you decide you're going to go to the gym to lose weight, you hate the thought of all exercise, perhaps, but the gym's on the way home, it's convenient, you can get it over with quickly, then I would find out that's what your incentive is and ask you to imagine, that you're leaving work, you're going to the gym, then when you finish at the gym, maybe imagine having a shower, packing your things up, arriving home still in good time. How do you feel in the evening? Do you feel smug that you've done your exercise already? Do you feel energized, relieved that you've got it over? These are quite positive emotions.
Yeah. Is smug a positive emotion?
I think so. Yeah, why not? So that's how that little bit of the conversation would go with functional imagery training. And we use imagery for, playing out those first steps that you need to do. Maybe it's going to buy some trainers or going and joining the gym. And then play it through to, how good it will feel to be succeeding and working towards your goal. We can use imagery to anticipate things that get in the way. Does your work colleague always invite you to the pub? So, maybe you've always got this tension in the evenings, which you're going to do. And then we can sort of, use booster sessions to update that imagery. So if going to the gym was too much of a challenge, is there something smaller that you want to work on? We can do some imagery about that. Or if you succeeded, what's your next step? So that's one bit. We use imagery to really kind of reinforce the emotions of succeeding at this and build people's confidence that they can do this, because imagery is very concrete. And also so that people can feel what it would be like to be doing this and become more aware of that. So, what does it feel like after you've been to the gym? Maybe you feel clean because you've just been in the shower, or maybe you feel a bit more taut because you've been using your body. Maybe you feel really hungry, and you'll know that the food you'll be eating, your body needs, rather than it just being kind of comfort food. So that's why we use imagery. And then in addition to that, we train people to do this imagery for themselves. And that's a really important part, because we don't want something where you keep coming back to a healthcare practitioner for kind of top-up sessions. We want people to have these mental skills for good, because weight loss is a long-term process. So in the training, we sometimes have to start really small. So we might say, if you were going to take a photo of what weight loss represents to you, what would it be? It's just the beginning of trying to make it a much more concrete thing, less abstract. Then the main bit of training is to say, this image that you've developed in the functional imagery training session, that goes from the first steps you're going to take today, sort of through working towards your goal for a week, through to maybe in 6 months' time when you've achieved it, that sort of personal movie that you've been creating in your head. You need to keep practicing that, so it's there when you need it, when you're faced with the chocolate cake. So we ask people, is there something you do every day? Maybe, picking up some water, having a drink, boiling the kettle, that would remind you to practice the imagery. So we get people to run through the imagery when they're doing one of these kind of trivial everyday tasks. And the idea is then, when you've got that decision, instead of thinking, no, I shouldn't have the chocolate because I'm trying to lose weight, you're thinking, no, I'm not going to have the chocolate because I'm about to go to the gym and I'm looking forward to that. I don't want to feel full of food before I exercise. Or it might be, I'm not going to have the chocolate because I'm meeting up with my friend. I don't want my teeth feeling all kind of stale and, covered in sugar. And so whatever it is that works for you, having that concrete thing that you're looking forward to achieving, that's there to compete with that image of how good the chocolate's going to taste.
Totally get it. Yeah.
So that training is, we have a series of sort of booster calls that gradually wean people away from, needing our input, and sort of give them the skills that if their goals have changed slightly, they can update their imagery by themselves. So that's what functional imagery training is.
And now there was a study I read about in 2018, and you compared one group with another group. Like, how did you set that study up, and what did the control group get that the heroes didn't get?
That's a really interesting question, one that we spent a lot of time discussing. So we didn't know that functional imagery training would work. The theory we developed said that it should work, but we didn't know that. Maybe it would only have quite a small effect. So one starting point would be, we compare it against nothing, or, just trying hard. That would have been a sensible starting point. But then you think, really, it doesn't make sense to look at weight loss over a few weeks. You need to look at it over 6 months or a year. How do you keep people interested in a study for 12 months when you're not giving them anything that feels useful?
Yeah.
So after sort of going through discussions about what's the minimum you can give people to keep them engaged in the study, we decided that we would sort of go the whole hog and give them something really good for the control condition. So the people in the control condition received motivational interviewing. So they had the same conversation, but without the imagery and without the training. And in fact, because we wanted them to have the same contact time, we sort of extended the motivational interview so that they were talking to the practitioner for the same length of time as people in the fit condition.
Wow.
So that was the control. We know from lots of other studies that motivational interviewing does help with weight loss. It tends to have quite a small effect. And
really?
That's so a fairly small effect, but often it's only 1 or 2 sessions. I mean, in our study, it was 8 sessions. So you could argue that for a really brief intervention, that's good, that it has, an effect. But, our research suggested there was room for improvement, which was the functional imagery training condition. Yes. So what we found, sorry, I should ask, do you want me to go on to the results, or have you got other questions?
Absolutely. Well, so the control group basically got, motivational interviewing, we use it in coaching, it's the standard, engaging them in their own story rather than just throwing advice at them. So that's why I was surprised it doesn't work that well, but my ego will recover. But what did you do differently in the actual study group? So they had the same time with the therapist, but the one therapist incorporated FIT or into the motivational interviewing. The other one just did that kind of textbook motivational interviewing.
Yeah, so they were actually the same therapist. It was Linda Solbrig who was doing this trial for her PhD.
Yeah, I saw it on your site.
Yeah, and she was actually really concerned because she was very keen on functional imagery training. She was concerned that only having the motivational interviewing, wasn't serving her participants as well as she could. So, I know just at a very personal level that she went all out to, do a really good job on the motivational interviewing.
Okay.
And that's what her participants said. So as well as collecting data on weight loss and change in waist circumference, we also collected some qualitative data. But the main findings were on weight. So our participants were all people who needed to lose weight or wanted to lose weight to achieve a healthy weight. I think the average body mass index was 33. So,
okay. So that's obese, class 1 obese.
Yes. So, there was quite a lot of variation, but it wasn't the case that we kind of somehow picked an easy sample who only needed to lose a tiny bit of weight.
Yeah.
We also had discussions about whether we would give people nutrition advice. We kind of assumed that people would expect it and we should have an answer to them if they asked for it. So we decided, in the UK, the National Health Service has kind of a website with advice about all different sorts of medical conditions and mental health conditions. And the sort of obesity part of that website, has very sensible programs for weight loss and sort of advice on healthy eating and exercise and so on. So we decided that when people asked for diet advice, we would send everybody to that website, and then we didn't have that added layer to the research that we were doing. What actually happened is, out of 141 participants, nobody asked us for that advice, which I think just goes to show that, focusing weight loss programs on giving people advice is the wrong starting point, because that information is out there if you're motivated and confident enough to look for it. So what people got from us was either up to 4 hours of motivational interviewing or up to 4 hours of functional imagery training. And that was sort of organised as a fairly long session face-to-face to start with. Then kind of a half-hour, 45-minute session by telephone, and then booster calls every 2 weeks, and then every month up to 6 months. So the total time was no more than 4 hours talking to the therapist for each participant. And then from 6 months to a year, we had no contact with people, but they knew that, they were coming back for a final appointment.
So they were being held in mind, like there was that element of it.
Yeah, so they were still in the study, but they weren't getting phone calls from us to find out how things were going. So, 4 hours is quite a minimal amount of contact time compared with going to a weight loss session every week or something. What we found was, for the motivational interviewing group, they lost a bit under 1 kilo in the first 6 months, and then they kept that weight off in the 6 months that followed. And that was a good outcome because, as you probably know, typically people lose weight during the active part of any weight loss intervention, and then they put on about 50% of what they lost.
I've heard much worse than that. I mean, I've heard you often supersede your start weight.
Sometimes that happens as well. And it's hard to know, are people at a sort of constant weight when they're not trying a new diet or a new intervention, or actually are they gradually putting on weight because they're not changing their diet at all? So finding that people's weight stabilized was quite a decent outcome. But what we found in the functional imagery training really exceeded our dreams. People lost about 4.5 kilos in the first 6 months, which was substantially more than the control condition. But the best bit was that in the 6 months where they didn't have contact with us, they continued to lose another 2 kilos on average, rather than putting weight on. So that was the really exciting bit where, nutritionists that we talked to go, "What? Are you sure?" They didn't put any of that weight on again. And what they told us was, in the control condition, people said, "I really liked it, but I needed more time. I needed more contact with you to really kind of keep my motivation strong." What they told us in the functional imagery training condition was, I wanted to learn this sooner, because once I'd learned how to do it, I didn't just use it for weight loss. I used it, to tackle other areas of my life. So what they wanted was a bit more time learning the imagery techniques at the start, and then to be let loose, to be able to get back to their lives without having to turn up for meetings.
Wow.
So there was sort of quite a difference in the impression that the two different conditions made on our participants.
That's insane. So, I mean, I remember seeing 5 times the impact. I don't know if that was in like a promotion for the study or the actual study, but I know it was, even the way I've promoted this interview is to 5x your results. And that's without a diet. That's like mind blowing.
Yeah. So it's not that people, could continue eating exactly the same as they did before, but somehow through sort of mind power were still able to lose weight. It was more that people made small changes to their lives. Some people went on diets, but a lot of people said, I just changed how I shopped, or I changed how I planned my eating, or I aimed for smaller portions. And one of the things they said was that because functional imagery training is very much focused on sort of positive emotions and positive imagery of, where you want to get to and what it will feel like, if people had a bad day, they were able to sort of get back to their eating plan and so on afterwards, because they actually enjoyed the process. And the other thing many people told us, was it felt like a mindset change. And one young man who took part in the study expressed it really nicely. He said that he used to turn to certain foods for comfort, and now he saw them as a threat, because he liked the way his body was. He liked how he felt after exercising, and the thought of eating a hamburger or something just felt like it would undo everything that he'd achieved. So he didn't have to use kind of willpower, whatever that is, to stop himself eating those foods. Just the desire to eat them had gone. And if you can achieve that, it's so much easier than having to force yourself to eat a range of foods that aren't
to white knuckle it.
Yeah.
Totally. So now what happens with this study? Because obviously the study's kind of proven a significant point. But were you doing research to develop IP to commercialize, or will this save the NHS money, or both? What is the application for it now? How is it being put to use?
So Linda Solbrig is training practitioners to deliver functional imagery training to their clients. We spent a lot of time talking about, do we kind of commercialize it as a package so that people can, do the training, get a license to practice it and so on. And for various reasons decided against that. I mean, just partly that kind of, as an academic, you're trying to make your research available to as many people as possible, and commercializing is almost the opposite.
It's in poor taste.
The ideas are out there, but I would, if you're interested in using functional imagery training, I strongly recommend being trained in it, because I don't know, it sounds easier to do than it actually is. And just the same as motivational interviewing sounds easy, but it can be really hard to avoid making suggestions or giving advice. So I think there's, having seen people train who become really skilled in functional imagery training, the training element is really worth doing. And also so that you appreciate how it feels to do it yourself. So we quite often, when I'm training people, I quite often have tears kind of in the training sessions. And I think that is sometimes because the imagery makes things feel more achievable than they felt before. And people have that sense of regret that, they could have done this sooner if only they'd sort of been shown how to think about it in the right way. Especially, the thing I always use on myself, and that a lot of busy professionals pick on, is kind of work-life balance. And it's just really hard when you're at work to put your family first. And I think when you can, the imagery sort of helps you get things in perspective, and then you can have that feeling of regret that you just got caught up in being busy. Yes. And there were other things that were more important to you, and that, you know, that seems to be a really common experience. So we're not looking to commercialize it at the moment. Okay. So the ideas are out there for people to try. I would strongly recommend training if there are any healthcare practitioners listening to this.
And sorry, so just to interrupt you there, how would does a healthcare professional have to pay the Plymouth University for training? Is that how it works, or?
At the moment, Linda Solbrig is offering training privately. She set up her own sort of company,
right,
delivering fit to people who want to use it for their own weight loss.
Okay, so that
issues, sure. And to train practitioners. Whether I'll go back to that, hopefully I will, but you know, with the couple of years we've had with the pandemic, you know, it's just been focusing on the core business of teaching students and doing the research for a year or two. But the thing I'm really interested in at the moment, which does relate to your question about rolling this out, is can we use the same techniques to help people with mental health problems, and particularly anxiety? Because quite a lot of our participants said they spontaneously did that. And I think this comes down to an issue of the divide between sort of a health service and private practice. And that is that health services almost inevitably are sort of focused on conditions, you know, so you go to one bit of the service to quit smoking, and another bit for weight loss, and another bit for mental health. But functional imagery training's approach is really saying, you know, which bits of your life do you want to look at? How are they connected? You know, how are you going to move forward with this problem? So even, you know, you think weight loss is kind of one issue, but very quickly in conversations with participants, you know, it becomes about feeling left behind at work, maybe, you know, people not thinking you're so competent because you're not as skinny as them. You know, stupid things, but for some people, they're, you know, that's what's happening because, you know, they work in horrible places. For other people, it's that mental perception. It's being able to sort of turn around how you feel about yourself. And for many people, it's also about allowing yourself to take some time for yourself. You know, especially if you've been focused on, I don't know, supporting a partner, bringing up children, looking after elderly relatives or whatever, that idea that actually you deserve to be healthy yourself can be quite hard to come to terms with.
Totally. Okay, so the future is to, just to go back to that, like the anxiety thing. So we have a lot of contact with our participants, and in fact, you know, we started off offering just the diet, teaching people how to cut carbs, and I mean, we've had really good results in the short term, but unfortunately, we have a lot of return business, which is like not what you want as a weight loss company, and so we developed an eating psychology program. We have coaching programs, like where I said we use motivational interviewing, and what we found is that there are a whole lot of associations, or at least correlations from our perspective, which are depression, anxiety, also debt and relationship issues. Those four in particular come like you have like at least one, but often more than one of those four with a severe weight issue. So it's, so I mean, I agree with you that exactly what you were saying, but I think the point I wanted to make was that we certainly don't see weight as a function of just nutrition. The nutrition is the smallest part of it, and you've proven that with your research. Just you didn't even tell people what to eat. It's mind-blowing. It's been amazing speaking to you, Jackie. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. Before we go, I mean, is there more that we need to know for right now, or how do people get access to your research so that they can learn how to do this themselves?
They can look at my staff page and read my papers if they want to read academic papers. They should be able to access all of those for free, okay. But if they can't, they're very welcome to email me. Assume you give out email.
Yeah, your link is the link to your Google Scholar profile is actually in the post of this link. So if you want to find Jackie, just click on that and you find all the research. Amazing.
The other thing I'd say is, a good starting point is to think, how are things now? How would I feel in 6 months' time if I continued as I am? Because I think we all battle with this status quo. Today's not the day to start my diet because I've got a long day at work. We kind of put our lives off day by day. So I think sort of tackle that inertia. It's good to sort of, just give yourself some time to imagine how you will feel maybe at a specific moment, maybe it's your birthday or Christmas or something, if nothing's changed. And then to switch to an image of how you will feel if that change that you want to make has kind of magically happened already. The same as you work with discrepancy in motivational interviewing, the imagery can put those two things side by side. The other thing that we teach in functional imagery training that people could do for themselves is something we call the Cravings Buster. Yes. So with that, we ask people to, imagine whatever it is that you have cravings for. If we stick with the chocolate example, just for a moment, imagine that you're unwrapping that bar of chocolate and you're taking that first bite. Really allow yourself to indulge in that. And now switch your attention to that image of yourself achieving your goal. And, really use all your senses to make that feel real. Notice what things look like around you, anything you can hear, maybe smell, how you're feeling in yourself. And then we ask people, what happened to that image of the chocolate or the crisps or the coffee or whatever? And I don't know what it was like for you, but typically people say, oh, it's just gone, or kind of faded. Because of this sort of feature of our working memory that you just don't have the mental capacity to do both things at the same time. And the useful thing about that exercise is that it gives you control. It's not like urge surfing where you just say, if you've got a craving, just sit with it until it goes away. Because when you're in the middle of it, that's a really hard thing to do. You've got nothing positive to shift your attention to. It's just like, notice this craving, notice how bad it is, and do nothing about it.
Did you write some research on surfing the urge? I'm pretty sure I remember reading something about that. Was it not on your articles? Okay.
No, I don't think so. Well, I mean, we might have mentioned it in passing, but we haven't done any research on that. But the Cravings Buster, once you've developed this really strong image of where you want to get to and how you're going to get there, the Cravings Buster sort of gives you that control of when you've got a craving, you switch it to that whole image. And the idea is that all these imagery exercises become a mental habit. So, when I'm tempted to have a snack, what comes to mind is no, because actually at the moment I feel my trousers feel quite loose and I like that sensation. I don't want to spoil that. Or no, because I'm really looking forward to my dinner tonight. I don't want to spoil my appetite. Or, I'm about to go for a run. I want to do that on an empty stomach. And it's just having those images kind of at your mental fingertips. So they distract from thinking, you can look at chocolate cake and not want to eat it. It's when you start imagining eating it that, it has that strong pull on you.
Fantasizing. Yeah. We like bathe in the fantasy as well until it's, until it almost seems real. And then we have to act on it.
Yeah. And one of the problems is we do that all the time. So, you know, if you think about cooking something, how do you decide if it needs salt or not? You know, you kind of imagine what it will taste like if you add some salt. Will that be better than what it tasted like just now when you tested it? I often use the example of, you know, if somebody offers me chocolates from a box, you know, I like all of them. Whichever I pick, it will be good.
Yes.
I still spend ages trying to picture which one is kind of going to be the most perfect.
Yes.
So we're really good at doing this imagery about things that we crave, and it's about learning that you can do that for the goals that you really want to achieve as well.
That's great. That's what I call I can't remember what you called it, but I call it the cupcake decision. The cupcake decision is this moment of truth where you're like, do I take the cupcake, or do I take do I serve my goals? But
yeah, and if your goals are kind of immediate, if you were told, look, you could have this little cupcake or you could have this great big chocolate cake, it would be an easy decision. And it's about making your life goals the great big chocolate cake. So they're mentally, they're immediate, they're achievable, and actually it's easy to go for those instead of the cupcake.
Awesome. Jackie, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Okay, I'm going to end the broadcast, but stay on the line for a second, please. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Check you later. Like and share the post, leave a comment, and go check out Jackie's research. Okay, check you later.